Hello and welcome to today's show. My name is Guy. If you're kind of wondering what happened to chapter 1.2, well, that's in last week's video. Now, if you're also wondering, what is this guy on about? We are doing a year-long series of videos working through the book, The Practical Guide to Becoming a Great GM, which will be available at the end of this year for purchase if you didn't get in on the Kickstarter, which finished a couple months ago. This is 2022 I'm talking. Now, the book details our journey on becoming a great GM, and that's the journey that we're going to be taking. So if you haven't watched last week's video, I suggest you give it a gander at some point, just to understand where we're kind of positioning ourselves as we are working through chapter 1 and the chapter points all kind of linked together. Last week, we spoke very briefly about the concept of aspect 1, which is developing you yourself as the GM before we can even start looking at world building and adventure design and campaign design. So we're looking today then at 10 things that I fundamentally believe to be true. And this, I'm hoping you will take on board, you will learn it. If you remember the word we developed last week, you will learn it, you will learn it, absorb it, you will nourish yourself from it, you will take it and adopt it as your own. You could also say that this is the social contract that I sign with my players before I start a game. What is a social contract or a social construct? Really, I mean, they're the same thing. A social contract is an agreement that you and your fellow players have at the table. Remember rule 1 from last week, the GM is just a player. He's no longer, or she or they are no longer an entity in their own right. They are now just part of the group. It is a construct between all of the players that this is how we're going to play our role-playing game. Why? Well, fundamentally, there are just a whole bunch of ways in which we can play our role-playing games. And a social contract kind of gets everybody onto the same page. Now, I will be talking about social contracts later, so I'm not going to go too much into them. Let's jump straight into it. The very first thing, rules. There are lots of debates. The GM or the DM or the narrator or the storyteller or the director should know all the rules in a role-playing system. By heart, they should just know them all. I remember I used to do that for Dungeons & Dragons 3.3 and then 3.5 and then Pathfinder. I was a pretty good encyclopedia of the rules for that system. I played it for nearly 15 years. Every week, I should have had a pretty good understanding of that rule system. When D&D 4 came out, I didn't know the rules, and when D&D 5 came out, it was so close to 3.5 that I kind of didn't really spend my evenings learning all of those rules, and then I kind of got confused between old rules and new rules. You know what? It hasn't affected my game, and I haven't once had a player go, "Oh, but you don't know the rules, so you're not a great GM." The reason for that is because you don't need to know the rules of the role-playing system that you are about to GM. You need to understand the context in which the rules sit. So if you understand the fundamental basics of the rule, the character is most likely going to roll some kind of dice, is most likely going to add or subtract a modifier from that die roll, and then we'll get an outcome which will either succeed or fail depending on a random value that the GM has assigned or that is fixed and have already been generated for you. If you kind of get that into your head and go, well, this is how this role-playing game works, or the player rolls a whole bunch of dice and the icons indicate a success or a failure, it doesn't matter. Understand the core principle of how the game works, and then understand that that is as far as you need to go. When it starts coming to finesse rules, there is absolutely nothing wrong with sitting around the table going, does anyone know the finesse rule or the specific rule or the minor rule for this particular event or function? If someone does, they give it to you. You go, great, that's what it is. Here we go. In the event that there is no rule or no one knows the rules, you are empowered because you understand the core concept of the rules to then make a call and move forward. After the game, you can then go and check on that rule and go, oh yeah, we were so wrong. But we will do that moving forward. We're not going to go retroactively and change anything. we will adopt it moving forward. So you don't need to know all the rules to begin with. That's the very big one that I think a lot of people put themselves under a lot of pressure to try and learn those rules. You really don't have to. In theory, you should be able to pick up a rule book, scan through it, get told what the basic mechanic is, and run the game. That is as simple as that, because really, modern day game design, the games all run on a single thread. They have their unique selling point, their unique mechanic, which is what really drives all of their sales and design thought and process. There is now a homogeny or a single thread through all of the role-playing games that we play. Each thread is different, so you just need to understand the thread in terms of the base mechanics, and you are golden. Number 2, the GM is not responsible for the story. It is a collective story. The GM is not responsible for the story, for the plot. The GM is not responsible for those things. The GM isn't even responsible for the adventure. Everybody at the table is a player. This is one of the basic concepts of the entire series. Everybody is a player. So if everybody is a player, then it means that no one particular person is responsible for the adventure or for the plot or for the story. Everybody is responsible for the story. Everyone has to contribute to that story. Remember that social construct that we were talking about? These are now these kind of parameters that we're setting. We don't have to know the rules. We're going to learn the rules together, or we're going to share our rules knowledge, and the story is shared as well. Responsibility is placed upon everybody at the table, not just one specific individual. We will deep dive into why the GM is not responsible for the plot, the adventure, or the story in subsequent chapters, so don't stress. Just for now, realize that there are multiple people at this table who are collectively telling a story. It is not your novel. It is not your movie that you as the DM are directing or writing. You are there collectively creating something new that nobody knows the outcome of. And that's another important concept, but not one that we're looking at in this video. The story is collective. So that's something that we need to bear in mind. You do not need to stick to the numbers as they are written. This is number 3. The numbers as written are created by designers for the perfect environment. There is no such thing as a perfect environment because we all play our games differently. We all have different mixes. We all have players who are doing certain things. We all have monsters that we want to make them slightly unique. I see this so often. People saying, oh, my monster was defeated so easily by my players. What is a more powerful monster? Why was the monster defeated by your players? Well, because the statistics, the numbers that were written down weren't sufficient for the task, because the players have got more power or less power or whatever. You're going, well, why should those numbers get in the way? The mechanics have to stay the same. The way in which the game operates has to stay the same. The numbers that are written down do not have to stay the same. Do not be a slave to pre-generated material. You are responsible in your space to create things that you want to role play and that are going to be fun. So if those numbers are preventing you from having fun, change them. That's a big mind shift for some people. They're going, oh, but isn't it all mechanically balanced mathematically? No, it isn't. Because role-playing is such a chaotic space, it is impossible to say that this monster will work with these numbers in every single situation it is placed. So those numbers are guides. Think of them as guidelines. Number 4. Never be afraid to run away or surrender. So many times I have been in games where I have had GMs whose monsters fight to the death. Every time. Why? Almost no one would ever fight to the death. This is an insane idea. I would never fight to the death unless I had no other choice. But if surrendering was an option and I wasn't going to be tortured and maimed horrifically and then killed, I would probably take that straight off the bat. As a matter of fact, most people would probably take that straight off without having a moment to have to pause and think about it. Most animals will do the same thing. Run away from time to time or just surrender. It makes for a much more interesting space. Now, also remember that I have been talking about the GM being the player. The GM is a player. You are role-playing. What characters are you role-playing? You are role-playing the NPCs. So if you are role-playing an NPC who is willing to die, does that mean that when you role-play a player character, they are also willing to die in every single fight and will never run away? That does not sound like good role-playing to me. That sounds like you are not role-playing and you are just letting this thing that you are representing live or die because you don't care about it. That's bad role-playing. So if you're a good role-playing GM, you will care about each and every single goblin, and each and every single goblin will want to live. I want to live. Live. And so it will surrender, or it will run away when it looks as if it's going to lose, or if it is already losing, or if it has taken lots of damage, etc. So never be afraid to run away. I wish that number 5 could be tattooed onto every player. Every player, including you, the GM. Item number 5. Everybody should have a goal. Everybody should have a goal. Say it with me. Everybody should have a goal. Monsters included. Remember, you are the GM. You are a player. You are role-playing the NPCs. You are role-playing the monsters. The NPCs, the monsters, the PCs. They all should have goals. It could be simple, like to go and get breakfast. It could be complex, like to develop a financial model that simply generates vast amounts of money based on a chicken rearing industry. Doesn't matter what it is, they need to have goals and they need to try and fulfill those goals, and they need to be sad when they don't get those goals, and they need to have plans to try and get those goals. So if you have a goal, it means you have a whole bunch of other things as well. You have a plan, you have ambitions, you have emotions attached to that goal. The goal is a key thing. And if a player sits down at my table and I say, "What's your character's goal?" and they go, "I don't know." "Oh, okay, well then that's what you achieved. Thank you for playing. Goodbye." If your character's goal is to raise a family, if your character's goal is to achieve glory, those are goals. Those are things I can work with. If you don't have one, I don't want you at my table. Because what are you going to be doing in the game? You're just there to kill stuff? There are computer games for that. Go play that. Everyone should have a goal. All right.